Carl Jung, the renowned psychoanalyst, never visited Liverpool, but he dreamed a dream that was to be pivotal in his life's work. I found myself in a dirty, sooty city. I had the feeling that I was coming from the harbour. It was night and winter and dark and raining. The dream represented my situation at the time. I can still see the city glistening with the wetness of the rain. Everything was extremely unpleasant, black and opaque, just as I felt then. But I had a vision of unearthly beauty. Liverpool is the pool of life. The town that John, Paul, Ringo and George grew up in was a tough northern town, coated in a thick layer of soot. To outsiders it might look unpleasant, with a city centre that at times resembled one vast bomb site. Due to its docks, it had been a key target for the German bombers of World War II, but there was always more to Liverpool than this. It was a wonderfully vibrant town, with warm-hearted people who were frequently ready to dismiss the problems they faced with a caustic joke. Both the humour and the energy were what the Beatles, together with the other Merseyside groups, would fuse into a sound that could be heard across the globe. It was to bring with it a dream that was to affect the world as strongly as Jung's dream had affected him. The dream was a dream of peace, of experiencing the powers of spiritual harmony and of love. So powerful was this dream that it helped change the way of looking at the world for a whole generation. So powerful, in fact, that when John Lennon himself declared that the dream was over, his power of prophecy had failed him. For many people still, the dream that Liverpool and its musicians created lives on. Hello, my name is Spencer Lee and welcome to this very special film about the Beatles' Liverpool. I was born and bred here, well, not in Lime Street Station, but you know what I mean. And I do programmes for Radio Merseyside, a music programme called On The Beat. We're going to meet a lot of people at Beatle-related sites along the way, and I've also got a companion for my journey, one of the best historians on Merseyside, Ray O'Brien. And Ray has written a book called There Are Places I'll Remember, the Beatles' Early Venues, and we're going to be visiting a lot of those today.
We are indeed, yes.
We're here at the doors of the Liverpool Empire. The biggest theatre in Liverpool seats 2,600 people. As you can see as we walk past, there's a Liverpool show on this week, a Liverpool musical called Tuppence to Cross the Mersey, starring Eleanor Bron, who was in the Beatles film Help. And what about the Beatles' history here, Ray?
Well, they first appeared here as the Quarrymen in the late 1950s for talent competitions, which incidentally they never won. They were also here in 1962 with Craig Douglas, I think, Spencer, which you know something about.
Well, they were here with Little Richard starring. It was one of Brian Epstein's first promotions. And as part of the show, they had to back the singer Craig Douglas, who had hits with Only 16 and the like. And Craig Douglas told me that he found them very competent indeed. Neil Brooks, who ran the Liverpool Empire at that time, was not happy at leasing the theatre to Brian Epstein for the night. He didn't think that a Liverpool promoter should be doing this and that a Liverpool band should be featured in this way. But it was to promote their forthcoming single, Love Me Do. And the second show did very well, not too many people at the first one. So that's 1962. What happened next?
Yes, they were here in December 1963 for a special jukebox jury before they went round the corner to the Odeon Cinema. I was here on that particular evening, and I remember hundreds of screaming girls outside this theatre, screaming particularly for George and John, who were in an upstairs dressing room window on the left, and they made their last ever appearance in Liverpool here in December 1965.
Yeah. We're going to cross the road now and walk over to the Walker Art Gallery in William Brown Street. The Walker Art Gallery is one of the best and most prestigious art galleries in the UK. In 1959, who should have won a prize here in the John Moores exhibition but that fledgling Beatle, Stuart Sutcliffe. Oh, hi Norman. Hi. This is Norman Killen. He was a DJ at the Sink in Liverpool, a main person on the Liverpool beat scene, and he now works at the Walker Art Gallery. And there's always been this connection, hasn't there, between music and art in Liverpool?
Well, it certainly has. A lot of people who were in music at one point or another passed through the art college, if not necessarily stayed there, but certainly passed through the art college.
Yeah, and Stuart Sutcliffe in particular.
Oh yes, yes. Although, I mean, he did go to the art college here, but his main influences were when he moved to Germany, of course, and a famous artist, Palozzi, was his main inspiration.
Yeah. And you had, I think, a very big Stuart Sutcliffe exhibition here, probably the biggest there's ever been.
That's right, yes. And we own one of his paintings, Hamburg No. 2, that he painted in 1961 and was presented to the gallery by, I think it was his mother, in 1964. It's called Hamburg No. 2.
Yeah. And what's your most endearing memory of the Beatles?
Oh, just the Beatles. I mean, they were part of my life from, I can't remember when really now. They're just, it's kind of a DNA, really. I mean, they're there. Without, I can't imagine what life would have been without the Beatles.
Okay. Norman Killen, thanks very much indeed. We're walking up the steps to St George's Hall now, but it is a great view here, isn't it, Ray?
Absolutely marvellous.
Yeah. Because we've got the Walker Art Gallery there, County Sessions Building there, and then the column with the Duke of Wellington on top there.
Yep.
And then we come London Road there where the Odeon Cinema is, the Empire there. It was only a few years ago absolutely teeming with people.
Well, yes, it was indeed. And I think you're talking now, are you, about the John Lennon vigil in 1980?
Yep, tell us about that.
Yes, I was here on that particular evening, and I think it was organised by Sam Leach. I'm not sure, but I think it was. And thousands and thousands of people here on a momentous night, and people with candles and singing Imagine and Give Peace a Chance. An emotional evening.
And there were a lot of tears there, were there?
A lot of tears, yes. Were you here, Spencer?
No, I wasn't. It was just a few days after John Lennon's death, wasn't it? It was organised extremely quickly.
I think it was 2 days after John's death, yes. And it was in a sense that the whole city had turned out to pay tribute to a wonderful musician. Let's leave Lime Street now, the area of Maggie May, and let's go up to Pope Street. There's a lot of Beatle sites there, and we'll meet some, I think, very intriguing Beatle people as well. Okay. We're inside the Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool now. This was built in 1933 because the original Philharmonic Hall was destroyed by fire. And it's a wonderful example of Art Deco architecture of the period. All the motifs
around the auditorium are just fantastic. It has wonderful acoustics here. It is just great to go to a concert here. The trouble is, in the 1950s, I hardly went in this place at all because they didn't have any pop music on here. The hall was owned by the council and they didn't allow rock and roll to come into this building because they thought that the seats might be torn or what have you, with one exception, and that was in 1958 when Buddy Holly and the Crickets came to England and they performed on this stage.
More recently, of course, we did have the Paul McCartney, didn't we? The classical songs for Linda.
Yes, Paul McCartney was here with his classical pieces for Linda, and we've also had both the conductors Clive Davis and Ron Goodwin conducting the Philharmonic Orchestra in suites of the Beatles songs.
That's right. And perhaps it's best known for Liverpool band, Spencer, with the Spinners, isn't it? Because they used to have their annual Christmas concert for years and years here, didn't they?
Yes, and Jackie and Bridie had Christmas concerts here too, and you had a lot of folk artists like Tom Paxton and such like appearing here. And it's always easy to interview people in this place because the sound checks never take very long because the acoustics here are just so wonderful. Okay, well, let's go out onto Hope Street again. Well, that was a piece of luck, them letting us in when they were setting up for a show.
It was.
So down onto Hope Street now and see where we go to next. So 32 Faulkner Street, 34 Faulkner Street. I've walked down here many times, past number 36, and I'm going to be very interested to hear what you've got to tell us about this place, Ray.
Well, this is quite a significant place in Beatles history, Spencer. It's not very often mentioned, but Brian Epstein rented a flat here in 1961 and 1962. No secret, Brian Epstein was a homosexual. Homosexuality was illegal in those days. You could in fact be imprisoned for it. And he was living at 197 Queen's Drive with his parents, as we know, but he had this flat as well.
And do you think his parents knew about it?
I don't know if they knew or not. He spent evenings here, he spent days here, so I do not know if they knew. They probably knew he had the flat, perhaps they did not know what he had it for.
And what happened in 1962?
Well, John Lennon and Cynthia got married on the 23rd of August, and after the wedding, Brian Epstein gave him the keys to the flat. And it is reputed that they did spend their honeymoon night here and did live here for several months afterwards.
Okay, thanks very much, Ray, and let's go back onto Hope Street. We're in the Anglican Cathedral now, and if you ever get a feeling that God is anywhere, you get a feeling that God is here because it is an absolutely extraordinary place, an awesome building. It was started in 1903 by Giles Gilbert Scott, who was an architect, a young architect, who won the design for Liverpool Cathedral. Now, what about some Beatle connections here, Ray?
Well, quite a few, Spencer. The obvious one is Paul McCartney, who was over the road at my old school, the Liverpool Institute, and where many religious services were held here. And the choir boys in the main used to be recruited from the school.
Yeah.
And you had to pass a test, you had to pass an audition when you were 13 years of age. Paul failed his. I failed mine. That's something we have in common.
But John Dufflow, the Quarryman, passed his and he got into the cathedral choir.
That's right.
Now, why would Paul McCartney, who I think is a Roman Catholic, want to be in the cathedral choir?
Because Paul McCartney attended the Liverpool Institute School, which is a Protestant school, and that came about because his mother, Mary, although she was a Roman Catholic, Jim, his father, was a Protestant, Mary had the impression that children at that time were better educated in Liverpool in Protestant schools, hence he went to the Liverpool Institute.
Yeah. And any more Beatle connections?
Yeah, a couple more, Spencer. John Lennon's service was here when he died in 1980, and also Paul McCartney, of course, had his oratorio here within the precincts of the cathedral.
Yeah. Let's go out onto Hope Street again because there's plenty to look at. We're going to leave the cathedral and go across the road to the Liverpool Institute building. This is where Paul McCartney and George Harrison went to school, but the building was derelict in the mid-1980s. Fortunately, Paul McCartney had the vision to rescue it, and it has become LIPA, the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts. I know that being in LIPA has special memories for Ray O'Brien because he was a scholar here. And what's he found now? Let's have a look.
What I found here, Spencer, is what we used to call a little green book, which listed every scholar year to year, of which you have, this is my copy there, isn't it? But I found the 1959 version. Which right,
and this is the 58 version, is
That's
it?
the 58 version, that one.
Okay, well, just guide us through this, the sort of people who were there at school with you.
Les Chadwick.
From Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Jerry and the Pacemakers. The two McCartneys, Paul and brother Mike. George.
Yep. George Harrison.
Myself and the politician Stephen Norris.
Right, okay.
Name at 5, but there were many more.
Okay, and he used to go out with Edwina Curry, who's just across the way.
That's right. Yes. I think he met her, through when he was a schoolboy here.
Right. And it's lovely the way they preserve the fact that this was the Liverpool Institute.
It's very nostalgic, and it's the first time, I've been back in this building since 1963 when I left. So it's amazing, isn't it?
You are missing out on the best kept secret in Liverpool, because the stage productions that they have on here by the students are absolutely sensational.
Well, I'm going to start coming
I've seen the Sondheim musicals here, several of them. I've seen Oh What a Lovely War and the like. They're just great. And they are actually rehearsing at the moment in the Paul McCartney Auditorium. Yes. So let's just have a look at what they're doing.
That was the old school assembly hall. Now, what we used to do here was they used to start assembly at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was a very strict school where we had to wear proper school uniform, with mums used to sew our badges onto the, like I've got here, onto the jacket. And I always remember George Harrison out of school not having his badge on. He used to have his collar up like this, Teddy Boy sort of stuff. Going to the bus stop over there. And I remember a friend of mine saying to him one day, "Hey George, where's your badge?" He said, "I only wear that in school." And what he used to do, quite ingenious really, used to have it here with a pen or a staple or something to hold it in, and as soon as he got out of school, off he came, and off he went back home to speak.
Magnificent. Great ingenuity even when he was 14 or 15.
That's right.
Okay, well let's go in the Paul McCartney Auditorium. I've got here the autumn schedule for the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, that's LIPA, the productions that they're putting on at the Paul McCartney Auditorium here, which is the old Liverpool Institute. And the principal of LIPA is Mark Featherstone Whitty, and Mark has been with the project from the word go. He was involved with Paul McCartney, or did Paul McCartney involve him? Because I tend to think of this place as Paul McCartney's dream.
Well, that is, of course, partly right, Spencer. What happened was in the mid-80s, Paul did a sentimental visit back to his old school. It was at the dead of night. He was filming, much like it's being filmed now, and people looked at the sort of derelict state of the building. So his focus was on restoring the building. The thing is, you can't just restore a building. You've got to restore a building for something, particularly if there's public money involved. And the public money that we achieved, of course, was very substantial. So what I brought to the party, as it were, was a use for the building. Now, and that was effectively the partnership, and the partnership was we were brought together by George Martin, the Beatles producer.
And what about the teaching here? Does Paul McCartney himself give seminars?
He does come up once a year to talk to third-year singer-songwriters, but we have a whole load of people who come and teach. He's just one of them.
Okay, Mark Featherstone Whitty, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure, Spencer. Thank you.
Lovely place, isn't it? Paul McCartney's done a tremendous job there.
Marvellous place, Spencer. Marvellous place.
And where should we go to next? Do you think? So many places to choose from, actually.
Well, I'll just point this out to you on our way there. This used to be what they used to call the lower school playground. That was the upper school playground, and there used to be a door there. That's the art college where we're going to now.
Yeah.
And at lunchtimes, George and Paul used to come from the school into the art college, through that door, up to a room there, which is called the Life Room, and they used to practice.
We're on Hope Street now. We're walking towards the College of Art. This is a walk that John and Stu would have done quite a lot.
Yes, I use the word staggering, Spencer, more than walk, because I could just imagine the pair of them after a late night at the Crack or a party in their flat, staggering along here rather bleary-eyed for their studies, which started usually at about 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right, and Cynthia was at the art college too?
Cynthia was at the art college as well, and that's where John and Cynthia first met. Cynthia Powell, as she was known in those days, of course.
Yeah, and
The posh bird from Hoylake, as John called her.
yeah. And they had some pretty famous teachers here, didn't they? Arthur Ballard himself was a well-known artist.
Arthur Ballard was probably the best known here, and I think he's written several books, hasn't he, about his time at the college. And I was told a story that John Lennon in class being very unruly one particular day, there's Arthur Ballard actually picked him up by the scruff of the neck, flung him across the room and said, "Lennon, if you ever do that again, you know, you're for it." And I don't think he did, but he did respect Arthur Ballard very much.
Well, Arthur Ballard was one of the characters in that film Backbeat, which was about the Beatles' days in Hamburg and Liverpool.
That's right, he was.
And I always remember going to the premiere of that at the Odeon Cinema in Liverpool and coming out of it, and I was with Adrian Henry. And I said, "What did you think of the film, Adrian?" And he said, "Well, that's the worst impersonation of Arthur Ballard I've ever seen in my life. They'd made the film with no idea of what Arthur Ballard looked like."
Is that right?
Yep. Okay, so let's go. Well, let's continue the walk, really, that John and Stu may have done on some days, because they would have gone from Gambier Terrace to the College of Art and then to the Crack, wouldn't they?
Where John and Cynthia had their first date.
Which is just another couple of 100 yards. This is one of the oldest pubs on Merseyside, so old that people used to come in here to discuss the Boer War, and there is part of the pub that is known as the War Office for that reason.
This is where John Lennon, Bill Harry, Rod Murray and Stuart Sutcliffe used to sit and sort the world out over a pint of beer.
So these are all people who are at the College of Art.
Yeah.
So you've got John Lennon sitting here.
Well, sitting somewhere here.
Yeah, you've got Bill Harry sitting here, the editor of Mersey Beat.
Yes.
You've got Rod Murray. Now, who's he?
Rod Murray used to have a flat in Gambier Terrace, and that's where John Lennon resided for a short while.
Right.
He was a fellow art college student.
And the fourth person?
Fourth person was Stuart Sutcliffe.
Right. And what did they actually dissent about?
I think they were just sorting generally, you know, over a pint, as people still do today, I expect, and sorting the world's problems out. I don't think it was anything at all to do with music.
Okay.
What would be going on around about that time? Perhaps it was just after Suez, wasn't it, and that sort of stuff. Probably not that, but you know, that sort of stuff.
And is there anything here to say that the dissenters were here?
There's a plaque over the wall, actually, in the main part of the bar. Now, John actually got barred out of this pub. And lots of people said it was for fighting, but it wasn't. The landlady, who is still alive today, actually, barred him out. Because students used to come in here, maybe as they do today, and spend a lot of time in a pub and not drink that much because of shortage of money. And I think they used to nurse a pint most of the afternoon. And she got fed up with them. In the end, told them to leave, and John Lennon not to come back. And I met the lady many, many years later, quite a formidable person, and she said she didn't care how famous he was then, he would not get over the door. He was still barred. And that was in the 70s.
Which must have been a bit of a drag for him, because at the time the College of Art was only 100 yards or so away from this place, so it really was John Lennon's local.
That's right, closest pub.
Yep. Having been refreshed at Recrack, we're now ready for a short walk to Mount Pleasant. This is about 5 minutes away, and we're looking for number 64. We've now stopped at number 64, Mount Pleasant. 64 Mount Pleasant with the yellow door here. And this appears to be lots of different offices now. But what was it in 1962, Ray?
Very interesting place, this one, Spencer. A mystery place, if you like. This is where John Lennon and Cynthia got married on the 23rd of August 1962. And of course it was a big, big secret because Brian Epstein didn't want to know that John was getting married because he felt that the Beatles may lose their popularity with the female fans. And Two interesting things here. After the reception, it shows they didn't have a lot of money in those days because they went for the reception at Reese's restaurant in Parker Street. Paul was here and George, and Aunt Mimi didn't attend, but Cynthia's mother, Mrs. Powell, did. And the other interesting bit is that evening, John and the Beatles performed at the River Park Ballroom in Chester.
Well, started, you mean, to go on with his married life, really?
I think so, yes.
I mean, he was really forced into the marriage, wasn't he, by Aunt Mimi and by Cynthia's mother?
No doubt about it, because in the early 60s it was the thing to do.
Yeah. And Julian was born when?
Well, Julian was born shortly afterwards, and that was a bit of a hush-hush job as well.
Yeah.
And of course he was born at Sefton General Hospital in Smithdown Road.
Yeah. But it didn't stop John gallivanting around at all?
Didn't appear to at all, you know, in several ways, playing with the Beatles and his other activities.
OK, thank you very much. We're going to get in the car and head south towards Speke for the Liverpool John Lennon Airport. This is about 4 miles away, and it's in a new building with, oddly enough, a yellow submarine outside. Well, you can see all these taxis around, and you can see how busy it is around here. Where are we? We're at an airport. We're at the Liverpool John Lennon Airport. And as we're walking around it, let's bring in someone very special. Colin Hanton, who was a member of the Quarrymen. He played drums for the Quarrymen, so he was John Lennon's first drummer, in fact, weren't you?
I was John Lennon's first drummer, yes.
OK. And
probably his worst drummer.
very honest of you, I'm sure you weren't actually, Colin. But how do you feel, sort of, John Lennon was just a lad years ago, wasn't he, 1957 or something like that, and now you've got an airport named after him?
Well, it's really a bit hard to imagine, isn't it? It's a bit surreal. I mean, I'm sure John would be laughing his head off if he thought that the old airport was renamed after him. Yeah.
So you think he'd take it as a big joke?
Oh, this is a huge joke, I would think, John Lennon.
Right. OK, well, let's walk around the Yellow Submarine. And then we're going to go round various childhood haunts of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And we've got Colin Hanton with us, who would have been in those places originally.
And he's going to show us around, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll show you around. Can you remember where it went?
Yeah. So we're still in Speke, and we're in a road that's built in a circle, Upton Green, just the one entrance in and out. And we're stopping by 25 Upton Green. Speke, it used to be said, the famous Ken Dodd joke when this place was being built up, how do you get a parrot to speak? The answer is put it on a 92 bus. Now, I thought that was quite funny.
I thought it was 93.
Anyway, there we are. 25 Upton Green. You can see there have been some improvements of late to the property, but George Harrison was living here during his early years as a Beatle. Is that correct, Ray?
Yes, the Harrison family moved here in late 1949 and lived here till 1962. And there's a famous folk song, actually. I think the Spinners did it. I don't want to go to Kirby, I don't want to go to Speke. And lots of families...
I don't want to go, from what I know, in back Buchanan Street.
That's the
and
one.
It's Jackie and Bridie, so I've got one up in you. Yes.
Sinners have done it as well, I think. But, and that was a theme in Liverpool at that time. A lot of families were moved out to areas like this in the late 1940s, early 1950s. But I think the Harrison family at first wanted to come here because they were living in Arnold Grove, which is a small sort of... back-to-back terrace houses, and the appeal was, it wasn't pulled down, but the appeal was the wide open spaces in Speke and the fields and that. I think George really liked it from all accounts and played a lot round here, but his mother never really settled in this area.
Yeah, and George's father was a bus driver. Was it ever likely that George himself would be a bus driver?
No, I don't think it was likely that George would be a bus driver, but as well as being a bus driver, Mr. Harrison also was the social secretary for the Merseyside Passenger Transport, and he used to put on a lot of bands at various social groups, social clubs. But the Beatles never played there, but I think George did. I think George actually played with his brother. One of the very, very earliest live performances from George.
Did actually play for the passenger transport social club.
They did, did they? Yes.
Was it a good gig? Can you remember it?
It was a good gig. It was my last gig, actually, the final gig. I think George's dad had got the gig at the social club, and we were there to play. And when we got there, it was a nice club. It was a very nice club. It was a really professional type club. We had a really nice dressing room. There was pictures of other artists on the wall. And the stage was a really good stage with curtains that actually worked. And we were set up behind the curtains. And we were to do 5 songs, you see. And as the curtain opened, we were playing. It was John, Paul, George and myself at the time. We did our 5 songs. And then as the curtains were supposed to be closing, they got stuck. So you could just see one curtain and some guy mixed up in it fighting with the curtains. So John said, well, while he's fighting with the curtains, we'll just do another song. So we carried on and did the 6th song, and the curtains closed, you see. As we came off, the guy said, it was really great, that lad. He said, you know, there's a pint for you at the bar, which was probably the worst thing anyone could have said, because we didn't stop at 1, did we? There's 2 and 3. We took pints into the dressing room. So when we went on for the second half, John and Paul were both, and myself, were both quite drunk. George was the only sober one. I mean, I feel sorry for George now, but he was the only sober one because his mum and dad were in the audience. It was an absolute disaster, the second half. So after that, I said, oh, that's it, you know, enough's enough. That was like 1959 early, so that was the last time I played with them.
So we've moved now from Speke to Allerton, just a couple of miles away. This is a council estate, and we're in Forthlin Road, and 24th Lynn Road is where Paul McCartney lived during his formative years as a Beatle. And let's not forget that another hit maker lived here too, because his brother Mike had several hit records with the comedy group Scaffold. So Ray, what can you tell us about this house?
Well, they lived here from 1955 to 1962, and I would say in that time this was more of the upper scale of council housing. As probably it is today in Liverpool and other cities, you were awarded points from your family background. We've been to Speke, we've seen George's house, which is possibly, with no disrespect to it, a little bit down market from that. But of course, Paul's mother was a midwife, his father worked in the cotton exchange, so they probably accumulated more points than the Harrison family. So possibly if George's dad had not been a bus driver and worked in the cotton exchange, it could have been the Harrison family living here and the McCartneys in Speke.
And looking at the house, that front room there, that's where John and Paul did actually write a number of songs.
They did indeed, yes, they did indeed. So it's a very historic place in Beatles history, this.
And what are your memories of this house? You've been down that path to the front door many times,
I must
presumably.
have been down there with my drum case, drum kit in one suitcase and a bass in the other. Yeah, we used to practice quite a bit in Paul's front room there. I seem to remember the dividing room petition, and his dad used to pop his head out every now and then and pull the curtains over, you know, to keep our noise out. But yeah, we used to have a lot of fun in Paul.
And interesting, isn't it, Ray, that on Paul McCartney's new album, that actually is in Forthlin Road on the cover of the album.
It is indeed.
So there he is, probably composing a song actually here. Who knows what he was composing?
We don't know the year of that, do we?
But it shows that he hasn't sort of rejected his past, doesn't it? The fact that he puts that on a contemporary album in 2005.
Yeah. The other interesting bit, of course, is they lived here till 1962, when they were really taking off. And it got unbearable, I think, for his father, with all the, you can imagine all the girls here in the garden and outside, and he bought his father a house, didn't he, in Heswell?
Yes.
Called Baskerville. Or called Rembrandt, actually, in Baskerville Road, in Heswell, yeah. You were saying, Colin, about the father being around when you were practicing. Well, later, I think he used to make them cups of tea and that, and I think Paul was very grateful for his father's encouragement.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
We're now about 6 or 7 miles out of the city centre. We're in Woolton, which is where John Lennon lived. We're coming up to St Peter's Church, which I know is going to have a lot of memories for you, Colin. And you have a lot of memories of Woolton too, presumably.
Well, yes, we moved from Bootle just after the war to Woolton when I was about 7. My mum still lives just down the road, King's Drive there. So.
It's a very nice place to live. I see there's a sign up that says best kept village in the northwest.
Yeah.
Well, this is Dave Peters, who's opened the hall for us, St Peter's Church Hall for us.
The Quarrymen played there twice in the field, and you're in the church hall now, and they played again.
What do you remember about that day, Colin? Was this a big gig in your diary?
Oh, it certainly was. I mean, the Woolton Village Fete was probably the highlight of the year. I mean, we were somewhat isolated from town, which is what we referred to, the Liverpool city centre. There was no televisions, there was no microwaves, there was no mobile phones. I mean, it was all very simple
Absolutely.
and happy life, wasn't
It's
it?
the highlight of the village.
So it was a big deal to have this thing, because I mean, everybody went, everybody came. I mean, probably every house in Woolton would have been empty on that day, wouldn't
Probably
it? Because
so,
everyone would have been on the fields.
No, you're talking about it, Dave, as though you were there.
I was there.
Oh, you were. You saw the Quarrymen. You saw
She's
John.
an original groupie.
It was quite a thing, though, to have a group like that. The youth of Woolton didn't have anything like that. Every dance before that was just simply a dance, by a small orchestra from the description on the stage. They turned up with music, live gig.
And so you were impressed. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were impressed by
They
what
were
you saw.
different.
Yeah. This is the place where Paul McCartney had heard the Quarrymen in the afternoon, and then he came here for the evening show, and John met Paul. So what do you remember of that?
Well, very little actually, to be honest with you. I'd probably gone to the pub when they were sitting in the back room.
This seems to be a recurring
I would
theme.
say so, yes. Yeah. I was only in it for the beer. But apparently Ivan Vaughan, was
Yes.
it? Ivan Vaughan introduced Paul to John, and I think they came into the... Well, it was probably that room, wasn't it? The rehearsal
Yeah,
room.
the
That's
rehearsal
where,
room.
probably where they sat and talked. But I only have a memory of seeing... On the field over the road, there was a big wooden scout hut. You remember the scout hut, big scout hut?
Yep.
Well, that's where our coats were and our instruments were kept when we weren't playing. And I was in there playing the drums, and someone was playing on a trumpet or a bugle. And Ivan came in with this strange lad that I didn't know, and they just stood in the corner talking to John for a while. And obviously, I realised later that it was Paul. But I don't actually remember him in the evening. I'd probably either gone back to Mons.
I remember him very vaguely in the evening.
Yeah.
Big babyface.
Babyface.
Yeah. Talking to our girls.
All right.
Right.
Yeah, we kept that baby face for many years.
He stood out in the crowd, though, because we knew everybody else here. This was the village. And this stranger came in.
That's why a stranger would stand out,
Did
wouldn't
stand
he?
out,
Yeah.
Well, the weather's taken a turn for the worse now, but it doesn't matter too much because we're in the gateway now of St Peter's Church, which we've been in the hall where the Quarrymen played. The field where they played is very close at hand, and this is the church. And there's the cemetery here.
Well, the main one I think that everyone comes to see is the grave of Eleanor Rigby, which is just down here on the right-hand side. And of course, we know the connections with the song, don't we?
Well, are there connections with the song? What's your take on it, Colin?
Oh, it's debatable, that one. I think if Paul wrote it, it's probably a coincidence, to be honest with you, because I can't see Paul spending much time at St Peter's Church Hall. They would have moved on by then when Paul wrote Avenue of Truth. So I've got my doubts that they ever actually saw that grave. I think it was just a name picked out of the hat.
I mean, songs like Let It Be really are hymns, aren't they? They're very, very close to hymns in their chordal structures.
Yeah.
And so you get that because they went to places like this.
Paul and Michael McCartney went to St Barnabas's church.
Oh, didn't they? Oh,
Yes, in near actually where Colin lives.
Yeah, in the
I think,
Penny Lane,
I think Michael was in the choir, and Paul failed a voice test for the Liverpool Cathedral choir. So I don't know about George's sort of religious upbringing or background, but certainly there's three Beatles who had some link with the church.
Well, gentlemen, welcome to Mendips, the childhood home of John Lennon. As you know, this is where John lived for 18 years, from the age 5 in 1945 right through to age 23 in 1963. He lived here for 18 years, the longest period of time in which John Lennon spent living in any one place.
The one thing that people must say when they come to this house is how come, John Lennon said he was a working class hero. You must get that over and over.
Well, I do, and of course, Mimi used to get quite irate with John for speaking in such a Liverpool accent. She would say, why do you talk like that when I brought you up to speak without a Liverpool accent? And he used to say, well, Mimi, that's what they expect.
Now, what about the death of Julia, John's mother?
Julia obviously was Mimi's youngest sister, and she had been visiting on the day of her death. She'd been visiting the house, visiting Mimi and John, and Dr. Michael Fishwick, who was a student living here, remembers that John left and said he was going down to Woolton, ostensibly to see his friends, but he also told his mother that he would walk over to her house on Blomfield Road and see her later on that evening, and he would like to see his sisters as well. And that suited Julia, because her partner, John Bobby Dykins, worked in the hotel industry and was going out to work that night. And so John would be around. But as the evening wore on, Julia felt she had to get back, just in case John hadn't turned up. And so she went outside to catch the bus. Now, normally, Mimi would have accompanied her to the bus stop, but because Julia suddenly realised what the time was and said, oh, there'll be a bus in a minute, Mimi didn't go with her because she still had on her bedroom slippers. And so she didn't go. Mimi came back into the house after saying goodbye to Julia, and her and Michael, the student, were washing the teacups up in the kitchen when they heard a screech of brakes, and immediately they were alarmed. They dashed outside and found that Julia was lying in the road, having been hit by a car.
Colin, you'd have been around at the time Julia was killed, wouldn't you?
Well, I was still obviously in the Quarrymen at that time, and Nigel Wally tells a story that he'd come to the house to call for John, and he met Julia at the gate, and she said that John was out, so he said he walked back to the corner of Vale Road with her talking, and he stood talking for a moment or two. He turned right to go up Vale Road as she crossed over the road, and it was only seconds later he heard the bang, and he said he ran over, and he was the first to see her lying in the road. Well, I think she was dead at the time. And I think he does feel some guilt in that, although he shouldn't feel guilty. But when if you ever talk to him and he tells the story, he's always sorry that he didn't talk for a few seconds longer. He always feels bad about that, Nigel.
Yeah. We're in the living room of Menlove Avenue now. Colin has already offered to do some furniture restoring work on the sofa there. In need of repair, do you think, Colin?
Oh, definitely. There's a full seat, and the springs are obviously sad and sagging, and the horsehair's probably underneath the things.
Right, okay. And Colin, can you point out a few things that are in this room?
Yeah, I can. I mean, what I think is very interesting are the bookshelves, because Paul McCartney said that it was something that impressed him when he came to the house for the first time, because in the living room they had bookshelves with books on them, which impressed him. And he said what impressed him most of all was the fact that John said, or claimed to have read, all those books. And that ties in with what Mimi said, that as a youngster John loved to read. He wasn't given to toys and games. He preferred reading, writing, drawing and painting, and his favourite author was Lewis Carroll, and as a Beatle, in one interview he actually said that growing up here at Mendips, when he was 15, his two ambitions had been to write Alice in Wonderland and to be bigger than Elvis.
So John Lennon's bedroom here, very small actually, Colin.
It is. It's what you would have termed a box room, isn't it? But this was John's bedroom. It's a little bit sanitised these days. When he was occupying it, it was quite a mess, I believe. A little bit of a bone of contention between him and Mimi when he was a teenager. But this was John's favourite room in the house. He described this to Yoko as the room in which he did his dreaming as a young boy growing up here at Mendips. And of course, he had a speaker wired up by Uncle George so that John could catch his favourite radio shows like The Goons, Dick Barton. When he was a teenager, of course, he'd huddle like all teenagers under the bedclothes with a transistor trying to pick up Jack Johnson on the Radio Luxembourg show. But it was in this room that John started to write songs. We believe the first song he ever wrote, Hello Little Girl, was written upstairs here at Mendips, as was Please Please Me. And Paul remembers coming to the house, and he said if John had written a new song, they would come up to the bedroom to learn it, because John had a little table in here with a typewriter on it, and he would type the lyrics, and John and Paul would sit on the bed with the lyrics in front of them and play. And Paul said, I remember the bedroom because it was so small, it was very untidy, and he said because we sat on the bed, the necks of our guitars would clash, because of course we were right and left-handed.
Did you come in here, Colin?
Only on the odd occasion I would come up to John, to his room, yes, but we didn't spend a lot of time here. I do remember Bridget Bardot being on the wall. He was very enamoured of Bridget Bardot, wasn't he?
So if we don't sound like the group.
Well, let's see if Aunt Mimi had luxury and go in her bedroom, shall we? So this is Aunt Mimi's room. Yeah. Again, a very light room. It bears out what you were saying about her liking white and cream and such.
Yes, she did like light.
And aren't they wonderful windows?
They are wonderful. Again, they are these beautiful leaded lights, which are a feature of all the houses that were built by that particular builder, Mr. Jones, I think it was, a Welsh builder.
Oh, Jones was it? Yeah, he built Mum's house down
right.
the road there,
Well, these were built in 1933.
251 Menlove Avenue was certainly a household for a privileged child, but just a few hundred yards away is Strawberry Field, which at the time was a Salvation Army hostel for underprivileged children. We're going to get there by walking down the road. The young John Lennon could get there in half the time by crossing a field and climbing a wall. Well, this time we're at Strawberry Field. We've hit it in the rush hour. There's a lot of traffic around, so I think I'm going to have to raise my voice here. But the place is known as Strawberry Field. Someone I see on here has put on this gate post here, they painted on Strawberry Fields Forever, so they've added the S to it. The song really isn't about strawberry fields at all, but John Lennon remembered the title from his youth and wrote the song accordingly. We'd like to show you inside, but the Salvation Army are none too keen on that. They're trying to sort of get away from the Beatles' connections with this place now, which is a great pity, and of course they'll never ever do that. There were children living in this home until about a year ago, and now it's a prayer centre, what's called a 24/7 prayer centre, and you can go into this prayer centre any time of the day or night and achieve solace there. Now, Colin, Strawberry Field, does it have many memories for you?
I don't remember an awful lot about Strawberry Fields in the early days, no. It's just that Pete Scott does tell a story about him and John, because they both just lived over the other side of the field there. They used to climb over this high wall, hide behind the bushes and have a sly fag.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you never wanted to join them for the fag?
I never wanted a sly drag, no.
So really, what we're saying is that Strawberry Field was about escaping, getting away from Aunt Mimi, doing something that you weren't allowed to do in 251 Menlove Avenue.
I would imagine so, yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that sums it up really, Spencer, because John Lennon was a great reader of the Just William books, and I could imagine him here pretending he was Just William with his little gang. A big pit shot and was a member of that, messing around the brushes and generally playing in this area. The centre of John Lennon country. We're near Calderstones Park, we're not very far away from Reynolds Park, and St. Peter's Church where we've been already. So this is where John Lennon grew up and played.
So we've come into the grounds of Calderstone School now, which used to be the Quarry Bank High School for Boys.
That's right.
Yep, and Colin, I was here only a few years ago hearing you playing on the playing fields.
Yeah, we had a great time on the field here. There was a stage set up down here somewhere, I think, on the right.
This is it, and this is probably the entrance that he actually went into.
Right.
And I think John was quite a punctual scholar because of Aunt Mimi. I think she made sure that he attended school and got here on time.
I'd agree with you completely on that, because Bob Wooler told me that at the Cavern, John Lennon was often the first Beatle there, which is quite surprising.
That's right.
And it was because Aunt Mimi had said, get out of the house,
right.
that's your duty. Paul had come in late and say, I've been writing a song, but not John.
And very much so in the school days, I would imagine, wouldn't you?
Yes.
With Aunt Mimi, she would very much, she wouldn't want the shame of anybody coming round or ringing her up or coming round to the house saying John's not at school today.
Well, I think there were days when he wasn't at school because he used to go off with Pete Shotton, didn't he? And hang around with Pete Shotton and miss school.
I mean, there was a bit of that, but I don't think there was that much, Colin.
Oh, no.
I think it was sort of just the normal stuff.
And were they rebellious at school?
I think they were. I mean, Colin, although you didn't go to the school, may be able to tell us a little bit more about that. But we've been to the house today, Spencer, and we've seen the school reports, and they weren't dreadful, were they?
No.
Interestingly enough, talking about this school, I mean, John would always say he didn't like his school days. I think Spencer knows this. That when he was in America, he got in touch with Aunt Mimi and he wanted her to send him, wanted her to get a Quarry Bank tie. I don't know where she got it, but she did, and sent it to him, which was gold and black.
That's right. Yeah.
And he put that in a trunk. And other school memorabilia that he wanted. Although he would say that he hated school, he hated this place, and yet he wanted these things, and it was almost at the end of his life.
Well, he was a complete dichotomy, though. I mean, he had this box marked Liverpool that he kept in his bedroom with all this memorabilia in, but at the same time, there are interviews that he said, I consider myself a New Yorker now, I have nothing to do with Liverpool. So it's really how he felt when he woke up in the morning. There's no consistency in those interviews.
Nothing at all.
So let's move on now. We're fairly close to Penny Lane, I think, aren't we?
We certainly are, yes. 2 minutes away in the car.
Okay. So the question has to be, are we really in Penny Lane or not? Because as you can see, the street sign has been taken. Fortunately, there's still one across the road. We're here at an infant school, Dovedale Primary, and this is a school that has got a couple of Beatles connections, Ray?
Very much so, yes. John and George both attended this school, although their paths didn't cross because John was 3 school years ahead of George, and at that age that was a lot, wasn't it? But Jimmy Tarbuck also attended this school, the famous Liverpool comedian.
And no doubt the school joker. I should think he was exactly the same then as he is now.
No doubt he's the school joker. I suspect John had his fair share of jokes as well.
And Colin?
Well, I never actually went to this school, obviously, because I was going up to, well, my school was in Boothwell. But I know, well, the Quarrymen did play here about 2 years ago, just as a charity concert to try and raise some money for whatever the school needed money for. But I do know that Yoko Ono was quite interested in the school, and she gave them, I think she gave them something like £25,000 to do up the children's playground. So there is a connection there, I think, with Yoko and that.
Well, we've done enough for one day, and we'll say goodbye to Colin Hanton from the Quarrymen now. But our cameraman Kevin is going to take his camera out to capture Liverpool at night time. You're going to see images of some of the buildings that you saw in daylight. And I'm sure you'll agree, the city looks wonderful at night. Morning again, and once again we're going to go south of Liverpool, this time around Smithdown Road and the site of the Toxteth riots. It's a very vibrant area, and as we'll see, this area is associated more with Ringo Starr than the other Beatles. And we're now coming into Admiral Grove, one of the 3 addresses associated with Ringo Starr in this area where he lived for a time. Admiral Grove, interesting little road because the numbers are consecutive, going right round, aren't they? It's circular.
That's right.
And number 10 is what we want, but in fact that V above the door gives it away.
It does indeed, because that's the V for victory, 1945.
This is a private house owned by Margaret Gross, and she's very kindly going to let us in. You've arranged that. The public can't go in this property.
No, but she does have visitors from all around the world. It's become something of a Ringo shrine.
Right, okay. Well, I can see the welcome there anyway. Okay.
Indeed.
Okay, do you want to ring the bell and introduce us?
This is the real home.
Yes. I know.
Yes.
Not Matron Street.
I know.
I see.
I know.
Well, he was here from when?
45 to 60.
This
is the very room, Margaret. When
This
it
is
was
the
his
room.
21st birthday, isn't it?
and it's
This
only-
room?
Yes.
This is the actual
Well,
room.
you see in the books that there were about 100 people in here.
No, there was 80. I got a book. There was 80 or 80 something people, and it only came up to here. Now you can imagine 80 people in this room. I would just like this to be put straight that he didn't only live in Madden Street. This is the main house.
Yes.
Well, that's quite right, because he was a Beatle when he lived here.
Exactly, yes.
But
yes.
He wasn't a Beatle in
it
Madron Street, was he?
It was Rory, what's that, Rory Storm.
He was,
you know,
but he was still a
before
Beatle, though,
that.
wasn't he,
And the
Margaret?
chap next door, number 13, named Myers, he used to be with Ringo a lot.
Because I think you
He
told
was,
me,
he was with Ringo a lot.
didn't the girls used to camp out and
Yeah.
sit outside when,
Yeah.
when he was a Beatle?
When he was
outside
yeah.
here.
But I didn't see one half that was going on because I was at work.
Yeah.
I was at work.
He'd be filled with memories if he came in here, definitely.
Oh, he would. I'm
Yeah.
surprised he
But
hasn't.
I just don't know if I knew where he lived. I know, everybody's been to America. They've all seen him. I said, well, why don't you tell him what I've said, that I'd like him to come back? But he only come incognito, but he doesn't.
Yes.
You see, he comes with this big long coat on,
Yes.
and he's standing, looking all around. The next thing, there's a crowd.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've been in Admiral Grove, we've now crossed over the road and come into Madron Street, and we'll find the Ringo Starr connections with this street. This street is much more run down than Admiral Grove is. You've got a lot of boarded up houses here, I see.
Yeah, indeed we have, because the houses here were going to be pulled down, but they've now had a stay of execution. And we're now coming to number 9, where Ringo Starr spent the first 5 years of his life, from 1940 to 1945.
Do you think he remembers anything of it?
I think he has vague memories of it, because his parents actually split up, they divorced, and he moved to Admiral Grove in 1945. A strange reason in some ways, really. His mother said she didn't want to be near the father, but as we know, it's only, 300 yards away.
So the father continued to live in Admiral Grove?
He lived here for a short while, and
Sorry,
apparently...
so the father continued to live in Madron Street?
Father continued to live in Madron Street. When Ringo's parents divorced, his father stayed with the grandmother, and Ringo would visit here now and again.
Yeah. Presumably the Empress Pub is in the same area, which is the pub that's on the cover of Sentimental Journey, the Ringo
That's
Starr
right,
album.
and Ringo's mother also worked there as a barmaid.
Okay, let's see if they've got any memorabilia. We're outside the Emperor's Pub now, which again, Ringo Starr connections in our little Ringo Starr tour. And Ray, would you like to tell us about this?
Well, the two connections, probably the main one is there's a sign over the pub which says the Sentimental Journey. That featured on Ringo's first ever solo album.
So this pub must have been Ringo's local, otherwise he wouldn't have bothered with that.
Well, it must have been, and geographically, of course, it's only 100 yards away, so it was quite a short distance for him to stagger home, wasn't it? Yes, and his mother worked behind the bar. She was a barmaid here as well. So he probably had a few stay-behinds.
Right, well, let's move on to Ringo's school now, shall
Which is
we?
just over the road.
So here we are on a rather windy corner outside St Silas's Church of England School. So, Ray, what can you tell us about this place?
Well, this was Ringo's primary school that he attended, or should I say rather not attended, because Ringo was a rather sickly child, so didn't come here that often. But he was a pupil here from the age of 5 to the age of 11.
So how good a scholar was Ringo?
Difficult to say that one, because he wasn't in school that often, so you know he missed a lot. Not the best of scholars, I don't think, but that may have been down to the fact that he didn't or wasn't able to attend that often.
And what was actually wrong with him?
Mainly chest complaints. I think he had pleurisy as a young child and best described as a rather sickly child, and convalesced for a long time in Heswell, which is over the water, and received his education there.
He's probably one of the few musicians at the time who wouldn't be bothered about conscription. Most of them were leaping for joy when conscription stopped. But Ringo would have been all right. He'd have been exempt from it.
Well, I think he just missed out anyway, Spencer,
Yes.
as did John Lennon. I think they missed out by about 2 or 3 months.
Right.
Otherwise, they would have been eligible anyway for conscription.
Indeed, right. Well, this completes our tour of the Beatles' childhood haunts and their adolescent haunts. And I don't know where we're going next. So I'm here in a replica of the Cavern. It's part of the Beatles story, and I'm with the founder of the Beatles story, Mike Byrne, a very good Liverpool musician. He now plays with a group called Jukebox Eddies. And Mike, I remember being down here in 1989, 1990, when you were showing me this place, and it really was a dream you had. It was nothing like this whatsoever. Derelict, really.
It was totally derelict, yes. It was the basement of the Albert Dock buildings, you know, which had opened about 10 years before to shops and a few restaurants. But when I came down here, the total basement was wrecked, as you say. It was derelict, it was smelly. There was gunge from centuries, actually, here in the basement, opened in 1846. But when I came down and I walked through, I smelled, I heard rats running about. But when I saw the shape of the ceiling here, I just said, this is where the Beatles story's got to be, because I could make this replica cavern. And that was one of the major items that I wanted to build in the exhibition. But the cavern just had something special. Other clubs in town, of course, the Iron Door followed the cavern with the same kind of atmosphere. The other bands were playing there, the Undertakers, King Size Taylor and Dominoes. It was just an amazing time to grow up.
Yeah, and you'll have seen the Beatles with Pete Best and the Beatles with Ringo Starr. What was the difference in, say, 1962, before the Beatles went on to other pastures?
The difference, I always thought Pete was a great drummer, to be honest, you know. I mean, when you saw the Beatles at, whether it was the Cavern or Aintree Institute or the other places you saw them, the Beatles were a great rock and roll beat combo. So, you know, you didn't say, oh, Pete, that drummer's not up to it at all. They sounded great then. But as time went by, and I think this was like a 2-year period, 1960, 62, when you watched every group, as you became more interested yourself in music, you saw all the groups coming up, you know, and then Merseybeat did the top 10, you had Lee Curtis, the Strangers, other bands coming up into this top 10, and the Beatles, I just think, they suddenly leapfrogged everybody else and became amazing. And if at the time someone had said to you, you know, who's going to make it in Liverpool? I honestly have to say, well, it would have been the Beatles. You knew something was going to happen in Liverpool because there was 300 odd groups. Something had to happen, you know. It was like a boiling cauldron ready to just blow up, and you knew something had to happen. But I really honestly believe that, you know, if anyone was going to make it happen, it would probably be the Beatles. To answer your question about Ringo Starr coming along, I didn't notice the change musically that much because I'd known Ringo from Rory Storm's band. You know, you'd seen him. They were all mates. They were all the bands were mates at the Cavern. They just mixed. The Cavern was so small, as you can see. Everybody just mixed together at lunchtime, evening sessions. Ringo was popular anyway because he was as famous as Pete Best. He was as famous as Rory because he had Ringo Starr time in Rory's band. So he was famous. So he moved into the Beatles. I don't think it affected any of the bands. They said, oh, well, there's another change of personnel. But the girls, of course, it was a different reaction because they loved Pete with the Beatles. And so there was an adverse reaction to Pete being thrown out of the Beatles.
Yeah, yeah. And when you opened this, can you just tell us about the first day? Because you must have been apprehensive as to whether people would actually come into the Beatles story.
Well, tourism was growing at that time, 1988, 89. Tourism was becoming a little bit more important to Merseyside as an image and also to bring some money into the economy. And in the first year, we had 120,000 people. So it was, it was a success from the beginning.
And everything looks really good for 2008.
It's looking good for 2008 and beyond.
So we're going to now move from this replica of the cavern in the Beatles story to the Hamburg section and get a few stories about Hamburg. Here we are in the Hamburg section of the Beatles story, the Star Club sign there, the replica of that sign there, and I'm with one of the real stalwarts of Mersey Beat. Now, the Beatles played the Cavern about 290 times. This man played the Star Club over 500 times, and I'm talking to the great, the legendary King Size Taylor. And King Size, I see you've even got a Star Club badge on there.
Yeah. Well, that originally was designed by Manfred Weisslieder, and that was really proof of the fact that you were under his protection in Hamburg. So nobody ever bothered you. Nobody tried to pull you into nightclubs or strip bars or anything like that.
Nobody'd ever bother you anyway. You were the toughest man in Liverpool.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised how many people still manhandled you. They'd take hold of your lapel and say, come on, first beer's free and stuff like that. And they just cut that out completely. Yeah, the Beatles were a bit lone. They were a bit of a loner group because they'd come off stage and they would disappear. Unlike all the other bands, they would go and meet in Gretel and Alphonse for a few scoops or whatever. But they would actually go because they'd been there before, and they'd met this, which Astrid Kirchhoff was one of course, and they already had a Hamburg clique. So when they played, they would disappear and come back for their gig and then disappear and so on and so forth. So they were never real mixers, the Beatles. Very, very funny habits, let's put it that way. I was sitting with Gene Vincent down a place called the Door to Hell at Surhully, and the big three were sat opposite me, and Brian Epstein comes walking in, and Johnny Hutch jumps up and says, Brian, this is King Size Taylor, King Size, this is Brian Epstein. And I said, well, who the effing hell is he, Because, we were... And who was he? Yeah. I mean, let's face it, in 1962, very early, who was Brian Epstein? He had a record shop. And I don't mean that big-headedly, but instead of saying who he was, which is a sad thing to this day, and saying, get on with this fella, he just comes in as if everybody's going to jump to attention. And even Gene Vincent couldn't understand why he was stood there. And he turned on his heels, went back out of the place. I was coming home on the 13th of January, 1963, and he bought my tour out and put me out of work. And I say put me out of work, he bought my tour over and didn't want to use me, let's put it that way. So I rang Manfred Weisslieder up, went back to Hamburg, became a resident band, and I still say to this day, I was in the right place at the wrong time, not the other way around, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And if I had my life over again, I would do the same thing.
Well, the Docks gave employment to about 100,000 people, and one of the people that it did employ was King Size Taylor's father. King Size Taylor, one of the stalwarts of the Mersey Beat scene, King Size Taylor and the Dominoes being the name of his group. And King Size, tell us about your dad, tell us about the Docks.
Yeah, my father, when he came out the army in 1946, he was already a City and Guild bricklayer, and he came down because there was plenty of work to do at the docks, obviously, and he worked for the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board right up to his retirement when he was 65, finishing up as a foreman bricklayer over a gang, doing all the renovation work on the docks. And I used to come down to the docks, watch them work, because I used to be able to lay bricks when I was 9 years old.
King Size Taylor stopped playing in the 1960s, and I thought, well, I'll never see King Size Taylor on stage again, that's it. He had a butcher's shop fairly near me, so he stole me steak and the like, and I thought he would never sing, and here you are back playing again. Does that surprise you?
It did. I always said I would never get back on stage, but now as I was persuaded to go on stage, I love it. I love every minute of it.
And you're married to one of your old fans from the start, Lev, now?
I am, yeah. Married to a girl that I didn't see for 39 years, and we just met again at the anniversary show in 2002, and the following year we were married.
Great. Well, it's been good to see you again, King Size. Well, we're now in the very centre of Liverpool. Paradise Street is just what we walked down, and I'm with Joe Robinson, a real expert on the Beatles, a real expert on Liverpool. He teaches on the Beatles at night school in Liverpool, and I'll be asking him about many of the Beatles sites we're going to come across in a minute or two. Okay, Joe, well, our first port of call on Whitechapel is Ann Summers. No, don't go in, we'll just look in the window. Okay, Ann Summers Trick or Treat, famous store, of course, chain store now. And what connection is this to the Beatles?
Well, Spence, you said that we should come here, so, why have we come here?
Well, indeed, I know as well as you, of course, this is the site of
North End Music Stores, otherwise known as NEMS, the headquarters of Brian Epstein's music business.
His empire, his Nemporium.
His Nemporium in Whitechapel,
yeah.
Liverpool.
Yeah. So this was where Brian Epstein worked on a 9-to-5 basis every day, running his NEMS shop. And what happened 9th of November 1961?
Well, Brian Epstein had found out about the Beatles through a record buyer that came into the store, Raymond Jones, and Raymond Jones asked for a song called My Bonnie. Epstein said that he'd never heard of the group, but that he would try and find the record, and Brian Epstein and his assistant Alistair Taylor made a 250 yard walk from NEMS up Button Street into Matthew Street down to the Cavern, which is where we're going to go very soon.
Much as I don't want to drag myself away from Ann Summers, I think we'd better do the walk. So we're now moving into Matthew Street, and you can see there another bit of the musical furniture. Up there there's an advert for the Matthew Street Gallery, which is a very good photographic gallery, but that's unfortunately now gone. We've got Welcome to Matthew Street, birthplace of the Beatles. That's telling us that we're going to go down Matthew Street now. You've got here something that's called the Quarry Quarter. In fact, there used to be a cafe there that legend has it was a bit of a knocking shop, but we're not going to go there anyway. We're going to go into the Beatles shop. So here we are in the Beatles shop, and let's have a look at some of the things that are for sale here, what they want, etc. So we're looking here at the memorabilia for sale in the Beatles shop. A lot of it is fun, but I don't think I'd ever really want to own it. Things, for example, like a Beatles wig. I mean, even if I should go completely bald, I couldn't imagine myself ever wanting to wear one of them. So let's have a word with one of the busiest men in Liverpool now, the manager of the Beatles shop here. And how long has the Beatles shop been going, Steve? Steve Bailey I'm talking to.
Beatles shop opened in 1983.
And were you there right at the start?
No, I wasn't. I didn't arrive here until 1984.
And what do you particularly like that you sell? If you were coming in here as a punter, what would you go for?
I like a lot of the limited edition photos and prints. I think they're, really nice. And if I had to choose, that's what I would buy. But to be honest, there's not much of the stuff at my house.
Okay, Steve Bailey, thank you very much indeed. And here we are, Joe, in Matthew Street. Always get a buzz when I go down here, don't you? Yeah. Fabulous. And there's the Grapes. Behind it, Lennon's Bar.
Lennon's Bar, been in there a few times myself.
Probably with John Lennon's Uncle Charlie. Yeah. And we've got, sadly deceased, and we're now going to meet someone in the Grapes, and that's the Beatles' first manager, probably an old friend of yours, Alan Williams. Okay, let's go in. Now I'm inside the Grapes pub, and I'm with one of the legends of the Merseyside era, and that is a man who's written his autobiography twice. The first one was called The Man Who Gave the Beatles Away, and the second one was called The Fool on the Hill. And his name is Alan Williams, and he was the Beatles' first manager. Alan, now you were a businessman in the mid-50s in Liverpool, weren't you? And you opened this coffee bar, the Jakaranda.
The Jakaranda, yeah. We were talking in the Jakaranda over a coffee, and Paul said, "Can I use your groups to back my artists when they work up in Scotland, because you're halfway to Scotland." Basically he wanted cheap groups, and I was a sucker, And I said, yeah, that's okay. Now, unknown to me, that earwigging on the conversation where not George Harrison, was Stuart Sutcliffe, the fifth Beatle, and John Lennon. They were listening to the conversation. And next day when I walked into the Jakaranda, they approached me, Stuart and John, said, "Hey Al, when are you going to do something for us like?" And I thought, what do they mean by that? Because previously, because they were from the art school, and I had horrible graffiti in the ladies' toilets, and they redecorated the ladies' toilets. They did such a good job, that they decorated the basement. I said, well, there's no more painting jobs, lads. He said, no, we've got a group, Al. I said, would you be our manager? And I was more pleased at being asked to be a manager of a group, even though I'd never heard of them. And so then we were going to Hamburg, cropped up. I had a steel band that went over to Hamburg. They did a moonlight flit on me. But being West Indians, they were lovely, friendly people. They wrote to me and said, Alan, why don't you come to Hamburg? There's loads of work here for your groups. Hamburg was more influential for Liverpool groups than the Cavern or the Beatles. Like, for instance, when the Beatles went over, I got a letter from Howie Casey saying, hey, Al, for Christ's sake, don't send that bum group over. You've got a good thing going over here. But I was confident that the Beatles had character and a charisma, so I sent them over. In actual fact, I drove them over there, and there were 10 of us in a little minibus, and with all the gear. Yeah, man, the amplifiers were only like an attache case in those days.
Were you actually ever the Beatles manager?
Oh yes. We've got documents to prove it, which I've sold. And if you listen to the Beatles anthology, they actually state, who do you believe, the Beatles, Paul McCartney, John, have all said it. When we started off, we had this man who was our manager, who was very good for us at that time. Oh yeah, it was very, very short time. No, well, Brian Epstein at the time, nobody knew him. He had a record shop, Nem's Record, and he wasn't in the business at all. And it was just that somebody, when they were playing lunchtime sessions, just right opposite to where we are now, and they'd done this record with Tony Sheridan, my Bonnie, and they were pushing the record, and kids were going over to Nem's, and because Brian was a professional person, and he said, well, who is this group? And he said, well, why didn't you go over? And of course, Brian went over one lunchtime, saw these guys all in their leather gear and fell in love with them. I think it was a homosexual relationship at the time, seeing all these, you know, lads in all their kinky leather gear, and they became their manager.
Well, he'd liked it to have been a homosexual relationship.
Yes, but it wasn't. They played up to it.
Yeah. And did Brian Epstein ever come to you for advice, though, because you've been handling them?
Oh yes, he came to me for advice and said, I'm thinking of managing this group called the Beatles. I believe you were involved with them at one stage. Could he give me advice? And I said, yes, they're good musicians. But I said, don't touch them with a archbow.
Yeah. And you...
He obviously didn't take my advice. But in the end, I think it killed him.
Yeah. Would you have liked to have continued managing the Beatles?
No, I don't think. I was a small cog in the history of the Beatles. And a lot of people ask me that, Sven. Do you realise you could have been a millionaire? And I say, I am a millionaire. A millionaire couldn't have had the fun, the excitement of the Hamburg days, the days of, the formative days of all the groups. So I am a millionaire, not of money, but of memories.
Okay, Alan Williams, thank you very much indeed.
That's a wrap, folk.
So here's a photograph of the Beatles, early 60s, probably 62, early 62, I would guess from that. So there you've got Paul McCartney wearing John Lennon's glasses there, so he's not really looking like Paul McCartney, but it is him. Pete Best, you can see, always a very good looking fella, looking a bit fed up with things there. George Harrison and John Lennon. And this would be early 62, I would guess. You could see they've got their drinks there. They've probably done their first set at the Cavern, getting ready for the second set. The Cavern wasn't licensed, so they came over here for their drinks. And this photograph, it says, was taken here with these good people having their meal. So let's nip into the Cavern Pub, shall we? And have a look at the memorabilia there, because there's a lot of stuff in here worth seeing.
There is.
We're inside the Cavern Pub here, and it's almost like a rock museum. It's fabulous, the amount of memorabilia on the walls, isn't it? It's
great.
Oh, absolutely all over the place, right the way leading through to the toilets, as you'll find. Interestingly enough, we got Wishbone Ash there. I remember when they were at the Cavern, and they've obviously dedicated a guitar, signed guitar there, that they've given to the Cavern Pub. Yep.
Memorabilia.
Yep, status quo. We'll have a look at that in a minute, but let's have a look up here on this stage area. They do have bands playing here. Tell us about these guitars, Joe.
These are classic replica Beatle guitars. You've got Paul's Hofner bass. You've got George's 1964 Gretsch, and you've got John Lennon's Rickenbacker 325, which he used to play very high up.
Yeah, and you know where he got that from, don't you?
He got that from...
Oh, not from where he bought it from. He got the style of holding it like that from Tony Sheridan.
He got it from Tony Sheridan in Hamburg. That's right, yeah.
And the country guitar, which is very much a Chet Atkins type of guitar. Type of guitar there. I mean, when you say they're replicas, they are actually Hofner, Gretsch, and Rickenbackers. They're just not the ones that John, Paul, and George had. And there's a Mersey beat up there too for George Harrison, known as the Quiet Beatle, even in 1964.
And let's not forget Ringo with the Ludwig drum.
Yep, and there's Ringo's last appearance in Liverpool was in July 1992, and there's a picture of him up there.
With the All-Star.
Right, let's have a look at what else is in the cases around the walls. Here. We've got here a guitar signed by Paul McCartney, signed when he came to the Cavern in 1999, that wonderful performance that he gave there. And also a guitar signed by Dave Gilmour. Dave Gilmour of Pink Floyd was actually backing him on that occasion. And you can see there the daily newspapers with the headlines in the newspapers, in the Post and the Echo, and even in the Daily Mirror there, of Paul McCartney being back in the Cavern. And they didn't get that sort of coverage in '63 in the Echo,
They
did they?
certainly didn't, and it was one of the first mega internet broadcasts. I watched the whole concert on the internet that night. It was absolutely fantastic.
Okay. Then we move away. Back to Macca in the Cavern there. And we're moving along here. You wanted to talk about this one, I know,
Well,
Joe.
I was just surprised to see Status Quo in here, but of course they played the Cavern. So
That must have been deafening that
It must
night.
have been absolutely mad. But there you go. So it's not just about the Beatles, is it? Some memorabilia about Status Quo, which is good to see.
And then round here we've got the genuine adverts for the Cavern Club. And you can see the wide range of people that were appearing night after night. Really good names. You could be assured of a good night's entertainment whenever you went, really.
And these are from Merseybeat, aren't they, Spencer?
Yes, they're all taken from Merseybeat, yes. So because Merseybeat was fortnightly, you got 2 weeks' worth of who was actually going to be on at the Cavern. We got the poster here, the advert for Sunday night at the Cavern. That was a very popular Radio Luxembourg series with the Denisons on. And going through here, we've got Benny King appearing at the Cavern. Nice historic picture of the Cavern there. They actually put the Beatles appeared here 282 times, but it's now known that that figure is wrong. It was a little less than that, about 275. And we go through here, smaller pictures there of the Beatles and other groups. Alexis Corner, first person to make a live album at the Cavern, Alexis Corner at the Cavern. And a compilation album that was issued on the Beatles' own label. Lots of photographs of people performing at the Cavern, including the Beatles. John Lee Hooker at the Cavern, so they had lots of blues artists there. And then we're coming back into the pub again.
I wonder if it's worth just...
So I'm standing now at the entrance to the Cavern, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go down into the Cavern and we're going to meet one of Liverpool's hit makers. Here we are in the bowels of Matthew Street, 10 Matthew Street to be precise, the site of the Cavern. You probably hear the underground trains rumbling by while we're speaking. And these warehouse buildings were derelict in the 1950s, and Alan Sittner had the wonderful idea of converting them into a club. He'd been to Paris as a young 16-year-old, he'd seen the clubs there, and he decided himself that he would build the Cavern. And in fact, that's what he did, and it opened on the 16th of January 1957. At first it was a jazz club, it had country and western nights, it had skiffle nights, and then it became a beat club. And one of the top groups on Merseyside, they had several hit records and they played at the Cavern, was the Foremost. And I'm very pleased to be joined by one of the Foremost, Mr. Billy Hatton. Hiya, Billy.
Spencer.
Good to see you again.
See you again.
Right, now, did you realise straight away that the Beatles were different from anybody else?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I first saw them at an all-night session at the Iron Door. Mm-hmm. And there were quite a few of those. They had them at the Cavern and the Iron Door. And I'd heard about them. And of course, you know, we were sort of in the top 10 groups in the city. And it was a distinct pecking order. And these lads popping in, I thought, oh, no, let's see what they're like. So I went to the Iron Door. We finished about, say, maybe midnight or so. Then the Beatles came on something like maybe 2 in the morning. And I purposely stayed upstairs, very, very aloof, you know. I'll go down when I want to, you know, stupid. Then I just heard the band start, I heard it through the floor. You know, that urgency. I went downstairs, I think they were doing Mr. Postman. They were that good, and then with the very, very first song I ever heard, Mr. Postman, hooked, and fan ever since.
Right. And what's happening now? Do you play at all?
No. No. I mean, I might be doing one last little bang of the drum shortly. I'm not quite sure. You'll see what develops. But once the Foremost finished in late 1978, after paying all our tax bills off, whatever, and then we formed the band with Joey Bauer, Dave Lovelady, and Joey's wife. We formed the band called Clouds, and I was with them for a while. And then I went to look after this boat in Cyprus. And I've done stuff for Mersey Cats and people like that, the odd charity. I think that the last show the performance I actually did was at the Jive Eye, which is now Crosby Comrades Club.
Okay, Billy Hatton, thank you very much indeed. Okay. Thanks, Bill. Yes. So I was talking to Billy Hatton of the Foremost then, a group that was very popular at the Cavern. The Cavern closed in around 1976. And it was thought that that was the end of the matter, that nobody would ever revive the Cavern again. The owners of the Cavern are now Bill Heckle and Dave Jones, and we're now going to be chatting to Dave Jones. Dave is over here. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Spencer.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's nice
Cheers.
to see you.
And I mean, David Backhouse, who redesigned the Cavern when he made it, he used 20,000 of the original bricks, I think, didn't he?
That's correct, yeah.
I mean, the site had just been filled in, so the bricks were there. And he decided to recreate it as closely as he could to the original. In fact, he said to me it was half an inch shorter.
Well, basically, when they excavated the site, the pillars of the archways, which you see the pillars around us now, the old pillars were still standing, you know, and it was like a Roman ruin. And obviously, all the bricks from the cavern ceiling had just been pushed inside the old club, and they took them all away, cleaned them all, brought them back. And what we're standing in now is a replica of the cavern built with the original bricks. This doorway actually marks the exact spot that you would have entered the original club. And many people sort of say they should never have knocked the cavern down. I think it was inevitable, really. And I never thought when I stood out in the street in 1964 that one day I'd own the place. It's quite special, really.
Well, that's it. I mean, the good thing is that you and Bill Heckle are such good fans, aren't you, of the music?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I was fortunate enough to see the Beatles in the 60s. I didn't see them in here, but I was also fortunate enough to, as a young teenager, to come to the Cavern, you know, and so it's got an extra special thing for me. Then I saw them up in Blackpool in the summer of '63. And I saw them at the end of '63 at the Empire Theatre in Liverpool, and that was it. And I couldn't hear them at the third gig. The other two gigs, I'd been able to listen to the music, you know. So I packed in after that, you know. I just thought it was nonsense, you know. I want to listen to the music, not the screams.
Great. Okay. Well, let's go out onto the street. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. We put this plaque on the door last year just to indicate where the original entrance to the cavern was, and it's amazing how people's memories have faded with time, and people are sort of saying, well, you know, no, it wasn't here, it was further up or whatever. No, it wasn't. It was here. And what we did, we asked Bob Buller to come down one day a few years ago. Myself and Bill Heckle and Bob stood in the street. We had all these photographs, and we were trying to pinpoint exactly where the entrance was. And then Bob produces this photograph, which was taken by Decca Records when they were recording down in the Cavern, when they did the Big Three live at the Cavern. And Decca had taken a photograph looking out of the doorway. It's the only photograph I've ever seen looking out, and you've got somebody just leaning on the door like this, the door pillar. And you can see everything that's in front of us now. And obviously the decoration of the building has changed, but what hasn't changed is all that brickwork there. The sandstone foundation and the brickwork. And on the photograph, it's as clear as a bell. You can see on that line of brick there, you can see that 9 bricks up, there's a damaged brick, and you can see this on the photograph. And there's the damaged brick.
Right. So this was the original entrance to the Cavern?
Without any doubt.
These stories in the books that the Beatles played to 1,000 people in the Cavern are rubbish.
I find it hard to believe. You know, I really do find it hard to believe. Our fire regulations down there for the whole area of the club is 375. So even if you doubled that,
yes,
you're still not, you're still short of 1,000 by a couple of hundred. And if you imagined all those people jammed in the front of that,
that's 375 for both stage areas.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Yes.
And if you imagined double that number of people, which is still only 800, jammed in that front of the club, I don't see it, but
Okay, well, let's have a look now at the wall you've created of all the groups that played at the Cavern.
And believe me, there are 1,801 names on the wall, or there were, but what's happened since we unveiled the wall, in the new era of the Cavern, we get a lot of famous names of today wanting to play. And you've got bands like Embrace, you've got classical violinists like Nigel Kennedy that played at the club, and we're highly delighted to find out. Travis,
Yeah, it's lovely the names that are on here. I mean, Jill Martin, she was a singer with the Mississippi Jazz Band. You know, some people that are really forgotten now, and it's great that they're all remembered on this astonishing wall that just goes on forever, doesn't it? And we've got the statue of John Lennon in the Hamburg shop doorway there. Now, this always strikes me as a bit odd, Dave, because you did this originally based on the Jürgen Vollmer photograph with John Lennon's head in 1961, the shop doorway, and now you've put John Lennon with a Beatle haircut on, so why?
What happened was, originally John was in the doorway, just down here, and it was the Hamburg shot of him in the doorway of his rock and roll album cover, and it was John in the doorway with his teddy boy haircut. But we had to remove the statue from the doorway because it opened as a coffee bar. And we thought, well, it had lost the whole theme of what the statue was about, the Lennon, the Hamburg photograph. So in moving John here, we gave him a new head. We gave him a Beatle head instead of a John in Hamburg head. And that was why, because he wasn't in Hamburg anymore. In the doorway, he was in Liverpool in the street.
Ah, a good justification, right.
A lot of people don't like it because they say his head's a little bit big, but it's quite obvious who it is, and great photo opportunity for the millions of visitors that come down Matthew Street every year, standing there next to John,
Yeah.
He gets assaulted a lot by the girls at night. I won't tell you what they do to him, but he gets some stick, I'll tell you.
And what's your view of this as a Beatle guide, as someone who lectures on the Beatles, Joe?
When I first saw it, I thought it was a bit overwhelming. There's that many names, and you could actually stand here all day, couldn't you, looking at all the different names and all the different groups. It's just so amazing to think that all these groups actually played at the Cavern. I mean, I think that's just it's absolutely wonderful, isn't it, to think that all these bands have played at the Cavern.
And the names are, they're carved in stone. I know that's a sort of cliche, but they are.
Well, that's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember interviewing Chris Farlow once, and I told him about this wall, and I said, I'll take a photo of your brick for you, and didn't realise that it'd take me half an hour to find it.
You can get up on the scaffolding now. But, well, what people have asked us to produce, and we still haven't done it, it's a scheme for perhaps a student at some stage, is to draw a plan of all the names and where they are on the wall.
Okay. Here we are in the middle of a very busy Castle Street, which is leading up to the Town Hall, and it was at the Town Hall that the Beatles had their Civic reception in 1964, and the streets were absolutely awash with people. Do you want to tell us something about that, Joe?
Well, it was almost like a homecoming of a football team. It was absolutely packed out, and I remember going to Liverpool's reception a year later, and it was very similar, absolutely packed out, and they came out on the balcony of the Town Hall and waved to everyone. It was absolutely tremendous.
They were lucky John didn't give a Nazi salute, weren't they?
Well, he has been known to do that before, Spencer. He did it in Australia.
At the moment we're standing in Castle Street outside the Town Hall, and we're going to go back a couple of hundred yards now to the Cavern Quarter, as it's so called. We're going to be back in Matthew Street and in the designer shopping centre, Cavern Walks. One of my favourite shops is on the first floor of Cavern Walks, and that is the T-shirt emporium from BTU. This is From Me to You, the Beatles store, and it's an amazing collection of stuff for sale. Fantastic, thousands and thousands of items here, I would think. And the owner of the store is Gary Blaine. You must spend half your life looking for stock.
We do.
Yeah.
So we search all over the world for it.
And is this one of the largest collections of T-shirts on sale anywhere? I've never seen such a collection of T-shirts.
It's the largest collection of T-shirts in Europe.
Good Lord. Yeah. And of the Beatle ones, which are the ones that sell the best? Can you show them to us?
Yeah, sure. Abbey Road is obviously...
Abbey Road again.
Road.
The Beatles shop said that Abbey Road was a big seller.
Yeah, Abbey Road is definitely the best seller.
Mm-hmm. I wonder why that is. What do you...
I can't answer that really. I don't know. It's not necessarily the best looking T-shirt neither, but it is the best selling.
Yeah.
Of all the licensed T-shirts that there is, and we concentrate on selling a licensed product. Of
So
all,
they're all official ones, yeah.
that's what we sell.
And of these other ones here, which would be number 2 and number 3, do you think?
With the Beatles and Pepper,
Yeah.
so you've got the 3 eras of the Beatles really.
And you never feel totally Beatled out?
No, I listen to it on the way into work, I listen to it all day, then I listen to it on the way home, and when I'm doing my work at night to get the stock, I listen to it then, so no.
what better testimony can you have? Gary Blaine, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, off to the Blue Angel. Here we are at the Blue Angel nightclub, and there's a plaque above the door for Dr. Duncan, who was the first medical officer of health. Now, he really had his work cut out in the 19th century because you had the poorhouses and the workhouses here, and conditions were often pretty terrible. And this man did a tremendous amount of good work. So how great to see a plaque for him here. But not, unfortunately, a plaque for the Beatles, Ray.
Nothing at all, Spencer, is there? Amazingly so, because this is the famous venue. When the Beatles performed here, it was not called the Blue Angel, it was called the Wyvern Social Club. 1 week later, it became the Blue Angel. But they came here for that famous audition for Billy Fury. Larry Parnes wanted a backing band for Billy Fury. And 4 groups auditioned in front of Larry Parnes and Billy Fury. Beatles were just one of them. They had no drummer, a proper drummer in those days. The drummer was a guy called Tommy Moore, who played with them intermittently. He did not turn up on time.
Well, he had a good job at Garston Bottle Works.
Did indeed. Johnny Hutchison, who was one of the best, well, probably the best drummer in Liverpool at the time, stood in for the first half of the numbers. At the end of the audition, apparently Larry Parnes and Billy Fury were very taken with the Beatles. But they had one stipulation. You can go on tour with Billy Fury, but you do not have Stuart Sutcliffe in the band. They didn't feel he was any good at all. John Lennon insisted that Stu went. He wouldn't relent at all, and they ended up not backing Billy Fury, but backing a lesser singer, also a Liverpool lad, Johnny Gentle. And they went on a tour of Scotland.
Yes. So we've come 100 yards or so from Seal Street into Slater Street. Alan Williams used to own the Blue Angel nightclub. He used to own the Jakaranda coffee bar. This was the first premises he owned, a very trendy teenage place at the time, now a very trendy pub.
That's right.
What else about the Jakaranda, Ray?
Well, we know as the story, isn't it, about the toilets and the walls, and John Lennon and Stuart Sutcliffe are alleged, and I use that word very loosely, to have done them, but that's open to question.
Yeah, well, we'll see the murals. The murals are still
here.
there.
Oh, they are here, yes. There are
and
murals.
It'll never really be resolved who actually did them.
I don't think they ever will be.
Yeah.
No.
And this was a pub close to the College of Art, so you'd have John and Stu and many others coming in here.
And all sorts of students, and Jerry Marson used to come in here as well, from Jerry and the Pacemakers. You name it, they came.
We're in the front hall of the Adelphi Hotel on Lime Street, and you can see that we're looking at the ceiling now, and this ceiling mirrors what's happening in the hall itself. It's an absolutely fabulous front hall here, and this hotel, a lavish hotel, was built 100 years or so ago with the idea of people who were going to New York on a cruise. They would be able to feel what it was like being on a liner if they came to the Adelphi for a night before they set off from Liverpool. By the 1960s, it was regarded as easily the best hotel in Liverpool, and all the stars who played at the Empire or the Royal Court would be staying here. When Tommy Steele appeared at the hotel, for example, he was in one of the rooms right at the top of the building, and a girl climbed up a drain pipe to try and get to his room. Pretty spectacular stuff. When Roy Rogers was here at the Empire, they tried to pretend that Trigger had a bed in this hotel, which was wonderful publicity for it. The Beatles, of course, had no need to stay here because they still had their homes in Liverpool. But around early 1963, Brian Epstein wanted to impress people that he had very good offices in Liverpool when he didn't. And he hadn't got offices in London at the time, so what did he do? He used to meet people who were interested in the Beatles at Lime Street Station, and instead of taking them down to Nems at Whitechapel, he would actually take them up to the Adelphi here, just a couple of hundred yards from Lime Street Station, take them in through the swing doors, show them this magnificent front hall, and then take them up these steps here and go in the lounge and banqueting suite. So this was really Brian Epstein's office for a time. So as you can see, Brian Epstein, who was a very honest man, did have a little bit of deceit about him. And of course, mirrors are a symbol of deceit and illusion. Let's get back onto Lime Street. We're at our final Beatle location now, the Punch and Judy, right?
It was the Punch and Judy coffee bar in the Beatles days. John and Paul used to meet Brian Epstein coming off the London train to see if he'd got a recording contract for them. Usually he had not, but then one day he did come in and he said to the delighted faces, "I've done it, boys."
And he got that contract with EMI.
He had indeed.
Yeah, and the confidence in the city just went on and on from there.
That's where it started, if you like, yeah.
We'll swing round now to the side entrance of Lime Street Station, those wonderful cast iron pillars there. Again, another building that showed the real confidence that there was in the city long before the Beatles, in fact. And what's been great about this magical history tour that we've done, Ray, is that so many of these locations are still around and are still very vibrant today.
That's right, the majority are, and the station is very much as it was, as we see it now, as it was in the early 1960s.
And I can tell you, I've been following the Beatles ever since they started recording in 1962, but it's in the last few days that I've learned more about the Beatles than I ever did. It's been absolutely stunning going to all these locations and finding out about them, and finding out how close they were to each other and the like, and how vibrant they are now. I've had a wonderful time, and I hope you have too. Thank you very much indeed for watching.